Half. But before we do, I want to talk about this this case that I think we're going to know within a day or two if essentially Roe v. Wade is done, is inoperative in this country. And what I mean by that, and let me just be clear from the get-go. Right now, there is a federal right, one that the Supreme Court has determined is embedded in our Constitution, for women to receive an abortion. And it is an important enough right that it cannot be infringed upon, but at the highest standard of scrutiny. In other words, there can be some mitigation of that right, some infringement upon that right. It states after a certain number of weeks, the state can outlaw abortion except for in very narrow circumstances. But the most recent example of this scrutiny came in regard to a TRAP law, which is a short for Targeted Regulation of Abortion Providers. In 2015, it was 2016, there was a Texas law that went to the Supreme Court. It was Whole Women's Health versus Hellerstedt. This is a Texas law that basically said, specifically said, a physician performing or inducing an abortion at a clinic had to have active admitting privileges at a hospital that is not more than 30 miles away from where the abortion is performed. And that hospital needed to provide gynecological or obstetrical healthcare services. So if you're at and many times, physicians working at these clinics do not have admitting privileges at hospitals. Certainly not within 30 miles, but very often they just aren't affiliated with the hospital. They work for the clinic. May travel, depending on the state, they may travel around to various clinics and whatnot. This was a law that was set up specifically as like a bank shot to make it impossible for clinics to provide abortions to women. It's like also, they have other laws like TRAP laws like this. Like the clinic must have 22-foot high ceilings. Things that are basically impossible to have happen in the real world. That decision, the Hellerstedt, was a 5-3 decision. Scalia was dead. There was eight justices on the court. And Kennedy added the 5th vote to the 4 liberals on the court. An identical law was passed by Louisiana. It went to the 5th Circuit Court of Appeals, and that court upheld the Louisiana law. Now, even one of the guys on the court, appointed by Reagan, wrote in the dissent that you all are ignoring the Supreme Court precedent. Circuit courts of appeal, they cannot ignore Supreme Court precedent. And this law, as written in Louisiana, was virtually identical, if not identical, to the Texas law. The Supreme Court struck it down. This 5th Circuit could not find, without completely ignoring the Supreme Court, that this law was constitutional. So the way that this is resolved is the case heads up to the Supreme Court. The lawyers who are representing the abortion clinic and two of the physicians, presumably who work there, filed an application to the Supreme Court on Monday, yesterday, to halt this Louisiana law because they've already resolved this question. If the Supreme Court now, which is constituted very differently than it was in 2016, Kennedy is gone, Scalia's seat has been filled, there is a 5-4 majority, more than likely, to simply say, we're not going to address this. In other words, we have no problem with lower courts ignoring that precedent we set about trap laws. And if that's the case, every state in the country that is a red state and more are going to try, well, the red states are going to try and legislate something very similar. They'll probably just start with this. And then if that's not effective in eliminating abortion services in their state, they'll come up with another one. And Roe v. Wade, there's not going to be any announcement that Roe v. Wade is overturned, but Roe v. Wade is essentially no longer in effect. Now, this dynamic already exists to some degree around the country. You have, I think it's 1 or 2 states in the center of the country where there's maybe one abortion provider, virtually impossible to reach for a huge percentage of the people in the state. But this is going to be more comprehensive. This is going to be contiguous states. It's going to be a real problem. We're going to get to that situation, and I think people predicted it when Kavanaugh was nominated, that at 5 years, abortion will all be, at the very least in 25, 30 states across the country, it'll be illegal. And this will effectively make it illegal insofar as the requirements that the states will have will make it practically, from a practical standpoint, impossible to get an abortion in those states. And we should know within a day or two whether the Supreme Court, how they react to this. If they say to the Fifth Circuit, no, send it back. You did this wrong. We've already ruled on this. Then it's alive for another, who knows. But if they don't, there's going to be 25 states within a matter of months, probably 20 states within a matter of months that will pass similar legislation, and abortion clinics will be basically impossible in these states. So
that's terrifying.
It's terrifying, and it's like it's like watching a slow motion train wreck. The moment Donald Trump won that election, it was all but assured, right? I mean, maybe a meteorite hits the Supreme Court or, knocks out people, but this is the reality. And we'll know in a couple of days about this, at least this threat. And I don't know, maybe Kavanaugh, Gorsuch will be like, or Roberts will say, I don't feel comfortable overturning precedent that is 2 years old. But when they don't really have to say anything, they just have to sort of turn their eyes away and look away a little bit. Very dangerous stuff.
Things are going to get pretty crazy, I think.
The next 2 years are going to be pretty nasty stuff. It could be nasty well past that, but I guarantee you the next 2 years are going to be difficult.
Everyone made fun of the women's strike for being sort of a cute, imminently forming thing that's not a real strike, but Like, we might have to do a real one. And I'm glad people are starting to wake those muscles up again, because we're going to need them.
It's certainly happening amongst the teachers across the country. I mean, there was a vote apparently taken last night in West Virginia to go do a one-day work stoppage. And this West Virginia is where a lot of these teacher strikes in this round started. And the fact that they're willing to go and do it again, they're not playing. And
not to mention all the airport workers.
The airport, we talked about that yesterday. It was when the airline attendants basically just said, "Look what's happening with the air traffic controllers. We're next." That was a not so veiled threat, and it worked. It worked. It took 2 hours essentially for that to happen.